Okay, so let me tell you what are the components. So the first component is the cluster. Second component is the task definition. And the third thing is the service. Okay, so cluster, task definition, and service. These are the three main components of ECS service, AWS ECS service. These are the three main components: cluster, task definition, and service. Okay, and it's really interesting to know how these things works. Yeah, so basically what happens, guys, that whenever you go to ECS, right, um, generally, let's imagine that you're working in a cloud DevOps team. Okay, so when you are working in a DevOps team, basically there will be a development team as well. Okay, basically there's a difference between development team and DevOps team. If everyone knows this, development team is responsible to develop an application, and DevOps team is responsible to host that application in an environment like ECS, EKS. So DevOps role is to run that application or host that application. But development team is the one who is developing that software, developing that application. So let's imagine that development team has created an application, okay, and they will hand over the Docker file, and this Docker file is responsible. Uh, this Docker file is responsible for for creating the containers. So with the help of Docker file, uh, this is actually a Docker image, and with this image you can create the container. So now development team will hand over this Docker file or Docker image, okay, to a DevOps team. So they will hand over the Docker image to DevOps team. Now, once DevOps teams has this Docker image, now this image, DevOps team will keep in some repository. Okay, guys, remember this thing. DevOps team keeps Docker image in the repository. There are two very popular Docker repositories. One is Docker Hub. Okay, one is Docker Hub, which is super popular, and second is ECR, AWS ECR. Basically, AWS ECR stands for Elastic Container Registry. So these are two registries, okay, and always remember that mostly the Docker image are kept in either in Docker Hub or in ECR. So when we say Docker Hub, it's the hub.docker.com, where you will find a lot of images. Let me just show you real quick. So when you go over here, this is Docker Hub, and on this Docker Hub, you will find a lot of images. Let's say if I want to find out the image for Node.js, I can see these are the images, and here you can see the Node.js agents. These are the images which are kept in this registry, which is Docker Hub. And Docker Hub comes with two types of registries. One is the public registry, and another one is the private registry. This is the public registry and the private registry. So these are the public registries where we are keeping our images. So this is public and this is exposed to public. Anyone can come and search it and can use it. So over here you can see how many downloads are there. More than 500,000 times it has been downloaded. So it is public repository. But when it comes to private registry, you have to basically sign in, and when you register your and you don't expose it to the entire world, you keep it for your own team for own use, then this is private registry. Because not all the applications, all the images can be exposed, because some applications are internal to your organizations. So that cannot be exposed. Now, Netflix will never expose Netflix image, because if it is image is exposed, anyone can create another Netflix. So that's why private repositories are used for a lot of enterprises where they don't want to expose their images. But some companies, they build images for public use. And at that time, you use public repository. So Docker Hub has both public repository and private repository. Private repository you keep when you don't want to expose uh, your image to entire world, then you keep it in private repository. And if you want to expose it and you want others to use it, then you keep it in public repository. So ECR, which is AWS ECR, is the private repository. Okay. Always remember, it doesn't have any public repository. So in private repository, what happens? That you keep all your images in ECR, and that cannot be shared with others. Okay. So there are two popular registries, yeah, Docker Hub, and ECR. These are the two popular registries. But Docker Hub has two types of registries. One is public registry and another one is private registry. Now, it's a very simple thing that ECS maintains a cluster. Okay. ECS maintains a cluster. You can imagine it's a cluster. Now, remember one thing, that we generally have only one EC2 in this cluster. Whenever we practice, we generally have only one EC2 instance. In case we want to have more, we can have more. And also cluster increases number of EC2 instances depending on the requirement. If you need more EC2 instances, it will create more EC2 instances. But by default, I have seen only one. So, but let's imagine there are two EC2 instances. So always remember, our job is to basically give the image to the cluster, and cluster will basically run it in the form of container. In case you want to understand Docker container more, I would request all of you to go back to my previous capsule, which was on Docker capsule, and attend that. That will give you more insight. What is container? What is Docker? If in case you have missed it, let me know so that we can provide you that. Go back to that capsule and watch. You will understand the real essence of Docker container. But now over here, you can imagine that image is developed by development team, and then we give it to cluster, and cluster run that image as containers in the EC2, and we don't care about it. We just know that two containers are running. Does that make sense, everyone? Yeah, other part of it, which is what were the three components I told you about ECS? Like there are three components of ECS. Under ECS, there are three components: cluster, task definition, and the service. See, guys, what happens that we build this cluster. Okay, this cluster is not human that we can send the image via post. It's not possible. We have to send send the image to this cluster in a proper format. That is task definition. So in the task definition, you basically define everything. Maybe information about networking, information about image, and a lot of other details. We will look at it in a while, and then this task definition we give it to cluster. Now, when we hand it over to cluster, but how do we hand it over to cluster? I mean, task definition file is just a plain definition. It's just a form you fill. Okay. It doesn't mean that when you submit the form, it directly goes to cluster. No, it never happens like that. Task definition is just a definition file which you write, and that's it. Then which connects task definition and cluster, that is service. So you basically go to the cluster, create a new service. This service picks up this task definition and run this image. So service is responsible to read through the task definition, and according to the task definition, it runs this container. So cluster is just an infrastructure you can imagine. Task definition is just an instruction file. But who follows that instruction? Service is responsible to follow those instructions on this cluster. Okay. And finally, the output is that your container is running on the cluster. So task definition file is the instruction file which is followed by service on cluster. Does that make sense, everyone?
Thank you for watching. Switch from non-IT to IT today. Explore www.thinkcloudly.com.